Welcome back, everybody. In our last video, we read pages 2 through 7, and so in this video, we will be reading pages 8 through 13. So please go get your magazine if you don't already have it, and follow along. Pause the video if you need to go grab it. And let's get started. Last time we talked about women getting ready for the revolution, how some served for the cause, actually fighting, and how many followed their husbands and families in the camps. So today we will start on page 8, Spies and Saboteurs. Top left of page 8. In wartime, it helps to know the enemy's plans. A spy's job is to find out enemy secrets. Women made good spies during the revolution because many people thought they were not clever enough or brave enough to do the job. Several women became saboteurs. Saboteurs. I pronounce it saboteurs. Saboteurs commit acts of sabotage, meaning that they destroy things the enemy could use. Let's start right here in the middle with this image. Lydia Dara was a midwife, nurse, and undertaker. She was a Quaker, so she did not believe in war, but she supported the ideals of the revolution. When British officers took over rooms in her Philadelphia home for meetings, Dara listened to their conversations at a keyhole. Her son then carried the information to Washington's troops outside the city. Once, when Dara thought the danger was too great for her son, she walked 6 miles to meet one of Washington's scouts. Her information helped Washington prepare for a British attack. Wow. I guess let's stay up here and read the caption for this image. Patriot women usually gave the troops tips that they had simply overheard. But Sally Townsend was part of a professional spy ring. When the British took over New York City, some of them made the Townsend home their headquarters. Sally gathered information there thanks to a tip from her. Patriot forces captured Major John Andre. He was an important British spy. The papers he carried proved that Patriot trader Benedict Arnold was about to turn over the fort at West Point to the British. In the bottom of page 8 here, this portrait. Patience Lovell Wright was an artist who made wax figures of famous people. In 1772, she moved to England. She met many important people there. When the revolution started, Wright began to spy for the Patriots. She passed along information she heard from her famous friends. People say she hid important messages inside wax sculptures that were shipped to the colonies for display. Wow, that is the first time I've heard of a secret message being hidden inside of a wax figure. Laodicea Dicey Langston was 15 years old when Loyalist troops camped near her family's South Carolina farm. She watched the Loyalists for months and passed on information to local Patriot militias. One night, she traveled 20 miles to warn her brother's militia about a planned Loyalist attack. Langston defended her father against British soldiers above, who were impressed by her bravery. Here she is defending her father. All right, this image looks like some barrels and antlers or a deer. In 1780, Martha Branton's husband left her guarding a warehouse full of gunpowder in South Carolina. Branton learned that Loyalists planned to raid the warehouse, so she set it on fire. All the ammunition was destroyed, but this kept it from falling into Loyalists' hands. Oh, maybe these are flames instead. Gunpowder is what they needed in order to shoot guns, and it destroyed everything. Bottom left here, this looks like a real photo. Loyalist women also spied for their side. Anne Bates was a Pennsylvania school teacher. She disguised herself as a peddler and traveled from one Patriot camp to another, selling sewing needles, combs, and other small items. She was able to pick up important information, such as the number of troops and the kinds of weapons they had. She relayed that information to Loyalist leaders. Bates was never caught. So interesting. So she was on the side of Britain. On this last photo here, many Patriot prisoners of war were kept on British prison ships in New York Harbor. Conditions on these ships were horrible. Elizabeth Bergen was a widow and a mother. She often took food and supplies to the prisoners. In 1779, she helped more than 200 men escape by giving them the details of a Patriot plan to get them off the ships. It's quite a beautiful image here on page 9. Oops. Looks like she's burning a field, maybe on a plantation since that's such a nice home here. Let's read the caption. Some Patriot women burned their own property to keep it out of Loyalist hands. In upstate New York, Catherine Schuler set fire to her family's wheat fields that kept British troops from using the crops. In revenge, the British burned down Schuler's house. And we have a think piece here on page 9. Finding out important information can change the way battles are planned and fought. During the American Revolution, some women served as spies, learning information and passing it on. How easy or hard do you think it was to learn enemy secrets when patriots and loyalists lived side by side? What would you have done to learn helpful information for the patriots? That's interesting. How easy or hard do you think it was to learn enemy secrets when both sides were living side by side? Remember how many British soldiers and loyalists would just be able to stay in people's homes? So there they are, living in your home. I don't know. Maybe you could listen through a keyhole to their secrets too. What would you have done to learn helpful information? Think about it. When you're ready, we'll move on to page 10 and 11. Looks like winter. Family in wartime. Here we go. It's a quote. My father was in the army during the whole 8 years of the Revolutionary War. My mother had the sole charge of us 4 little ones. When my father was permitted to come home, his stay was short, and he had not much to leave us. Yet, when he went, my mother ever bade him farewell with a cheerful face, and told him not to be anxious about his children, for she would watch over them night and day. Sometimes we wondered that she did not mention the cold weather, or our short meals, or her hard work. But she would not weaken his hands or sadden his heart, for she said a soldier's life was harder than all. It's a quote from the viewpoint of a child. Pages 12 and 13. These will be our last pages for this video. let's go on here to page 12, the main text. On the home front. Life on the home front was not easy. With men away at war, women had to protect their families, earn a living, and defend the family's property. This was in addition to all the hard work they usually did to run the household in peacetime. So women had a lot more to do since there were no husbands around. Let's take a look at this image. Women on the farms were not used to being in charge of planting and harvesting crops. They had to take on these jobs as well as their full-time chores. However, many took to the work quickly. Letters to husbands show that at the start of the revolution, women usually wrote about your farm. But by the end of the war, more women were calling it our farm. That is so interesting. So when their husband left and they wrote them letters, they said, oh, your farm is doing this, I'm on your farm. But by the end, they felt more ownership and started calling our farm. Over here, it looks like Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was one of the most famous women on the home front. For most of the war, her husband, John, was away on official business. So Abigail took charge of the family farm in Braintree, Massachusetts. She had to deal with a shortage of farm hands, people who work on the farm, rising prices, and a lack of wool and cotton for clothing. But she kept the farm going. She also kept the family out of debt. John wrote that their friend James Warren told him that my farm never looked better than when he last saw it, and that Mrs. Adams was like to outshine all the farmers. Abigail Adams became First Lady when her husband was elected the second President of the United States. She was also the mother of John Quincy Adams, the sixth American president. Sounds like she knew how to run a farm. Before we visit the large picture spanning both pages, let's keep going on page 14 here with this image. Looks like a bunch of people, children, gather around a fire, maybe cooking something in a pot. Loyalist women faced many of the same struggles as Patriot women. Plus, Loyalists who lived behind enemy lines feared violence against their families and property. Many left their homes, becoming refugees, and moved to Loyalist-held areas. Conditions in refugee camps were harsh. By the end of 1782, in a camp near Charleston, about 200 Loyalists died each day of hunger and exhaustion. More than half were children. Looks like this image of this guy. Many Native American nations sided with the British, hoping the British would keep settlers from taking more land. Seneca Chief Red Jacket is shown wearing British red. Patriot forces attacked Indian villages. Mary Jemison, a white woman who had lived among the Seneca since age 15 or 16, reported that Patriot militias burned crops, destroyed houses, and killed cattle and horses. In 1781, Nancy Ward, a Cherokee married to a white trader, tried to work out a peace agreement between her people and American officials. This photo of some people farming. It was hard for Southern women to run plantations while their husbands were at war. For one thing, they could no longer sell goods such as cotton to Britain, which had been their main buyer. For another, they depended on enslaved people to do the work on their plantations. The British encouraged enslaved people to escape. Southern women feared that enslaved people who didn't escape would revolt. In South Carolina, 60% of the population was enslaved Africans. So they have no one to sell their crops to. because they're not selling it in Britain anymore. And most of the people in town were enslaved people who probably were not very happy about it. Well, they definitely weren't. And our last photo on the bottom of this page. From the start of the war, the British promised to free enslaved Africans who left their owners. Thousands of enslaved people escaped. They traveled with the British Army. Old Ross was a 56-year-old African woman who helped a group of fellow enslaved people, including 3 of her children, escape from a plantation in South Carolina. Now let's take a look at the picture spanning both pages. Do you guys know who these are? They're in red coats. Yep, they're the British Army. And I wonder who this woman is. Let's find out. Here we are. Women who lived near the fighting were sometimes forced to house British soldiers. That created extra work and put a strain on food supplies. Some Patriot women feared their daughters would fall in love with British officers. For 2 years, British officers lived in Rebecca Mattie's home in Charleston, South Carolina. She went to great lengths to keep her daughters hidden from view. After British troops took over her house and made her family leave, Mattie helped set the place on fire. Wow, so they lived there for 2 years. And then they took over and made her leave. She set the whole place on fire. Can you imagine having people from the opposite side of the war living in your home? We don't allow that today. Okay, my friends, we learned a little bit more about life on the home front and the important women here. We had a nice quote through the eyes of a child whose father was fighting in the war and came home from time to time. And we learned about the women spies and saboteurs who destroyed things so the enemy couldn't use them, like this woman destroying her own wheat field so that the enemy couldn't have the wheat. Check mark. That's the end of this video. I will see you in the last video. Be sure to come back so that we can finish reading our story. I'll see you then.